Hello, I'm Penny Thornton and I'm talking astrology. On this video, I'm talking about Pluto in Aquarius. Now, Pluto moves into Aquarius on March the 23rd, 2023. It only spends 11 weeks in Aquarius initially. It'll come out again in June of the same year. And then it'll go fully into Aquarius from January the 21st, 2024, all the way through to 2043. So it's about a 20-year cycle. And that's one of the important things about Pluto, is to realize that it's a generational effect. Pluto in the same sign, it affects a generation. And the only reason it becomes personal is, first of all, where it is in your natal chart, which house it sits in, and also all the connections or aspects it makes to the planets and points in your chart. That's when Pluto comes into our personal experience. Now, there are many things about Pluto to take in mind, to bear in mind, and I'm going to try to put all of them in without kind of clogging us up with so many facts we fall asleep. So I'm doing my best to keep you awake as I take you through all of these things. So the idea that Pluto spends 20 years in a single sign, takes 248 years to go around the sun. And one of the reasons for this is it's incredibly far away. It's about almost 4 billion miles away from the sun, from us. And yes, therefore, it takes a very long time to move through each sign. Now, not just because of this factor, but in 2006, a very prestigious group of scientists decided that Pluto was not a planet. It didn't fit all the criteria necessary to be officially a planet, to be part of our solar, well, it's part of the solar system, but not in our group of planets. Now, two things about this. Not every scientist thought that was right, and there is still quite a body of scientists who believe Pluto should still be included in our solar system planets. However, the other factor is that astrologers have been working with Pluto for almost 100 years. And we can recognize the effect Pluto has, whether we're looking at it in terms of global events and really big, great, powerful trends, or whether we're looking at it in an individual way. And one of the reasons astrologers get to kind of work with a planet and how we start to understand its meaning is sort of twofold. Part of the reason is the name it is given. Astrologers do not give a new planet its name. It's the scientists who come up with the name. And of course, in terms of what happens in our solar system, all the planets are called after Roman deities. So Pluto became the 9th planet in our solar system and was given the title of Pluto after Pluto, the king, the lord of the underworld. And I'll come back to that in a moment. So that's one reason we start to figure out, what does Pluto mean? We look at the mythology and see what this mythological Pluto was like. But also it's about what happens at the time. Now, if we go way back, we go back to when the planets were first noticed. My goodness, how many thousands of years are we going back? We have incorporated what the ancients understood about the planets into our modern day understanding of astrology and the planets. But since 1781 and the discovery of Uranus, and this was a groundbreaking discovery, because until 1781, Saturn was considered the outermost planet in the solar system. That's as far as you go. That was the end of everything. But suddenly Uranus popped up and it was like, oh, wait, look at this. This is something new. And at the time that Uranus was discovered, there were all sorts of revolutions going on, the Industrial Revolution, Things were moving from the land, from the arable sort of system through to industry and machines. Things were coming away from the country into towns, and there were revolutions going on. So we started to build our understanding of Uranus out of what was happening at the time. Same with Neptune, discovered in 1846. So Pluto was discovered in 1930. And what was happening at the time was that there was a rise in depth psychology. Also at the time, fascism was on the rise. Also at this time, there was the splitting of the atom. Now, these are very key events, and they tell us an awful lot about Pluto. The times that happened, what was going on at the time that a planet was discovered. And certainly this idea of the rise of fascism, extremism, is a very Plutonic property. And we also look at the idea of the splitting of the atom. What happened? This infinitesimally tiny little thing was split and released enormous energy. And of course, we know what came on from there, the atom bomb, and we know the devastating destruction from a small amount can be. And Pluto is that too. It is small but powerful. Now, having said Pluto is small, it's actually sort of in the last sort of few years, Pluto is considered to be kind of bigger than we thought it was, and in fact is one of the bigger planets outside, the transpersonal planets. So it is very dense. There are things about the planet itself that tell us that it's a very powerful entity, and it's deceptive. It doesn't quite look what it is. And we can find parallels in myth that also tell us the same thing. What else is there? The idea of extremism, the rise in depth psychology. Yes, that was certainly something, or is certainly something we associate with Pluto. This idea of, with Pluto, we plumb the depths. In this case, the depth of our psyche, and come up with all sorts of understandings and revelations. That too is very Plutonic. The idea of small being enormously powerful is also to do with when we look at tiny, tiny organisms under a microscope, we can see them because they're made much bigger. And the same with a telescope. A telescope looks out into the vast distance, and it brings objects that are too far away to see, well, certainly with the naked eye, and we can see them. So we understand a lot about Pluto just from these factors. If we come to myth, we know Pluto was the lord of the underworld. And of course, the underworld was a very fearful place. The idea of hell, when you died, you went to the underworld, and it was a very, very scary place. But in fact, Pluto's kingdom was considered to hold great riches. If you were able to discover them, there were riches there. And we certainly apply this in our modern understanding of Pluto in astrology, that there are great riches to be experienced and found and treasured under Pluto. And we need to remember that, because we do get kind of concerned about a Pluto transit. Remember, there are great riches to be found. Now, the other factor is that Pluto was given a helmet, and this rendered him invisible. So he could go about his business and no one could see him. And the parallel here is that we never see a Pluto transit coming, or we never see the events that go with that Pluto transit. We don't see them coming. We're not meant to, because when we encounter them, they are meant to really, really take us into the depths of whatever's appropriate, the depths of emotion, the depths of understanding, the depths of strength, all sorts of things we have to find through our Pluto transit, and we don't see it coming. And another thing that I'm going to be talking about in the sense of Pluto is that we get stripped of something when Pluto does his, comes around our charts. When he makes a transit, something goes. We never have any choice in what is stripped away from us. And I think we see here two things. we see the idea that Pluto strips away veneers, so those protective layers are stripped away from us in whatever way, and there the raw individual, is left naked. We have some interesting keywords for Pluto, which also help us in our understanding of what Pluto means by moving into Aquarius and by coming to different parts of our horoscope. We understand the keywords: transformation, elimination, reformation, my favorite. And I've said elimination, that means something is stripped away, is gone away. But death and rebirth is a Plutonic process, and sometimes that gets associated with the idea of real death. And I think that's a mistake to think of that with Pluto. It's not real death. It's the death of something, and out of that death, something is reborn. And I'll give you another metaphor or image to work with when we think about Pluto, and that's volcanoes. When you think about what a volcano is, when it erupts, all that hot, molten lava, which is deadly, comes pouring out and down the mountainside. But in its wake, it leaves very fertile minerals that feed the earth, and abundance comes out of it. And we need to think of that as you go through the fire, as you go through the kiln that proves you emerge refined, you emerge better than you were. And that's another very powerful thing to really take away from Pluto. Another thing, and I use this a lot in my writings, the idea that when you strip back things, let's say we strip back the garden, we strip back bushes and whatever else, and when we do that, we guarantee abundance in the next season. Same way, really, we may strip the paint off our walls or strip the wallpaper off, and what do we find behind? Often an awful lot of treasures. You know, if your house is old enough, may reveal all sorts of things. That's another thing we need to remember with Pluto, this quality of revealing what's been hidden. So I also need to look at the idea that Pluto's relationship with Scorpio is meant to be, if you like. I mean, until Pluto was discovered, Mars was always the ruler of Scorpio, and we still do take that into consideration. But really and truly, Scorpio and Pluto are synonymous, because Scorpios, or the sign of Scorpio, is a sign of extremes. It's also fire and ice, that's an extreme, do or die. You know, these are good old Scorpio keywords, if you like, and well known to those of us who know Scorpio or who we may be Scorpios. We also need to look at that idea of the phoenix rising from the ashes, which is very powerful. And we think about how often Scorpio, if you've got a strong Scorpio element in your horoscopes, or your sun Scorpio, how you have gone through the fire, you have seen situations go up in smoke, but you rise again like a phoenix, bigger and better. And that's another very, very powerful image to remember from Pluto, rather than all these rather scary things that make us feel, you know, we don't want to know anything about Pluto at all. It's just like, you know, good medicine cures you. And sometimes we have to have seriously good Plutonic medicine. Now, of course, Pluto is moving into Aquarius. So we need to think too about Aquarius and what this is going to mean in terms of global trends, developments over the next 20 years. You know, when we think about it, we need to think about Aquarius itself. It's an air sign. That means, as an air sign, it's strong on concepts and ideas and communication and all sorts of things that sort of expand our understanding. That's Aquarius. But Aquarius is also a fixed sign. That's a very complicated merging of two things. When you think air likes to be free, and fixed signs like to be unchanging and unchangeable, that can be a difficult thing to put together. But if you know any Aquarians, you'll know that they can be very fixed in their ideas, and they really do like a kind of fabric, or they like a structure that goes with their ideas, and they are apt to kind of stick to their beliefs unless they are forging the way ahead. And in part, that's a melding of Uranus as a ruler of Aquarius, which is the breakthrough, groundbreaking, revolutionary Uranus. And we get the Saturn rulership of Aquarius, because until 1781, Saturn ruled Aquarius, that we have this idea of limitations with Saturn. Things can't go beyond their limits. It is a planet that requires boundaries and structure. And when I was talking about Saturn in Pisces, I talked about crystallization, didn't I? That's a really good word to use for Saturn. So we get these two planets influencing the sign of Aquarius. So we have a pretty good idea that as we go through, or as Pluto goes through Aquarius, all sorts of things to do with thought, to do with technology, to do with flight, and I'll come back to that in a minute. Artificial intelligence, the growth of that, the transformational effect of what these things will have on our lives is important, as we will also see great political reform and huge political and social change during the course of Pluto through Aquarius. And because we know full well that we are having a complete crisis over climate change, and we have no idea how the years ahead are going to be, but we can see, we have a pretty good idea that shortages are going to happen. We've got all sorts of things making it difficult for things to grow, and the seas to get bigger and invade them. And so we can see there's going to be a lot of things that we're going to have to get our minds around, and society will change, nations will change. So Pluto is going to be a very powerful force for that. We also get an idea about what Pluto in Aquarius might mean for us by going back to the last time Pluto was in Aquarius. And that was in 1776 through to 1798. Remember, another 20 or so years. Now, if you're American, or even if you're not American, you'll know that 1776 was when America as we know it was born, the Declaration of Independence. Now, what did that declaration contain in terms of words? Well, it contained life, the pursuit of happiness, those kind of things that are the brotherhood, if you like, of man. They were contained within the Declaration of Independence. And at the same time, over in France, the French Revolution, the phrases coined during that time and then came into the Republic and the Constitution of the Republic, and that was fraternity, liberty, equality. So these kind of words are ringing with Aquarius, aren't they? They are resonating with Aquarius, and we have Pluto going in here, as it did in 1776, and all the huge revolutions at the time that in turn forged very new attitudes and societies, and changed our thinking, moved us into extraordinary level of development in all the things that we now know in a way, or we take for granted as a living in modern times. And that was forged as Pluto went through Aquarius back then, 240 years ago. So we have some idea about that. And the thing that I also want to focus on a little bit is America here. And what I did was I set up the chart for Pluto's arrival in Aquarius. And I said it from Washington, from the perspective of Washington, so that we could see how it looked for America. And I'm going to show you that chart right now. And if you can see there, Pluto, of course, at 0 degrees, Aquarius, 0 degrees, in the 8th house of this particular chart. What we're looking at here is Pluto returning to its original position in the United States chart. Now, technically speaking, Pluto in the USA chart is 27 degrees and a few minutes of Capricorn. But of course, it's been approaching that degree. It's met that degree. It's going to go forward into Lord of Aquarius and come back again, very close. And that's another point that I want to illustrate about Pluto, is that you really need to give a 4-year margin of safety, for want of a better word, on a Pluto transit. It will be approaching 2 years before it makes its exact position, although the idea of the events that are going to be important to achieve the Pluto process will be closest in that year before it approaches exactitude and the year after. But then there will be traces of it the year after that. So it's very important to remember that. And as we look at Pluto in the USA chart, yes, all right, it met with its natal Pluto last year, 2021, but it's going to hover back there and go forward again. And we know that what we can see that America is going through an amazing kind of crisis of consciousness, if you like. Who is it? What is it? And we're seeing this huge political divide, the far right, the far left, if you like, and we're seeing racism and bringing that out, where there are so many things that are proving divisive, and we can definitely trace that back to the Plutonic process. And over these next 2 years, as Pluto continues to hover around its natal position in the USA, we shall see huge political and social change within the country. Some of it, difficult to swallow. This is not going to be an easy process. And I think, again, taking out Pluto and Aquarius in general, if we think that democracy came about when Pluto went into Aquarius in 1776, we're not bringing about a new kind of democracy as it goes into Aquarius again, 240 odd years later. We are going to see a different kind. Yes, maybe there is a different kind of democracy, but in real terms, what we're looking at a moment is the breakdown of democracy and the rise of far-right totalitarian autocracies, that power is in those hands. So there is a lot of things we need to be aware of as Pluto goes through Aquarius that isn't terribly pretty. And it's difficult to see how democracy will get better. It can transform itself, but quite how? Well, we're going to have to wait and see. I find it interesting if we come back and look at this chart again, and we see Saturn on the midheaven, and we see Mars rising. So we have Mars and Saturn on the 2 angles of the chart at the time Pluto enters Aquarius. And we're taking this as a symbolic moment. It's symbolic of something. So to have Mars and Saturn, Mars the lesser malefic, and Saturn the greater malefic, as they're called in older kinds of astrology, does suggest that Pluto is arriving in Aquarius at a time of great strife for the United States. And maybe we don't really need a chart to tell us that, because it's coming at a time where the war with Ukraine and the situation with Putin and the West is really, really, really critical. And we may be seeing from this to a certain level that maybe things have to get worse before they get better. But I also want to look here at Pluto in the 8th house, which suggests to me that at the time there is also that changes, big, huge changes in the economy. And if we look at that image I gave you of the volcano, which is so Plutonic, out of that volcano comes all this molten lava, which is devastating, out of all that comes a new economy. So I think we are going to see, and I suppose you could say, well, Pluto's in Aquarius for 20 years, yeah, probably during that 20 years, there is going to be a terrible, terrible economic crash, and all sorts of monetary systems will have to change because of it. But my feeling is this may be sooner than later, and maybe that's what I'm seeing imprinted on this particular chart. So let's come back to me again. And there was another point I wanted to mention when I was using the keywords really to Pluto to help us understand what this planet means. There's another, a couple of words that go with it, and that is creator destroyer. So that in many ways, whatever Pluto destroys, strips away, as I termed it, then it's creative because things grow out of it. In the vacuum, something comes forward. Another thing, just before I leave, the idea of Aquarius and flight. I mentioned Aquarius and flight, and grapes thrives in flights into space, even ordinary kind of flights that we might all take from one part of the world to the other, supersonic flight. This is all going to be Pluto in Aquarius. And last time when Pluto was in Aquarius, the Montgolfier brothers, they launched the first man flight in a hot air balloon. So I think, that's another demonstration of Aquarius air, hot air, plutonic air, breaking, the new ground. But here we are, 240 years on, and a new level of Pluto in Aquarius, and some exciting things about flight are going to come forward. Now, the other thing that I want to look at before, I go into it sign by sign is Pluto's sort of transit to itself. And now we're talking astrology, and we're looking at Pluto squaring itself, Pluto square Pluto, and Pluto opposition Pluto. Now, most of us will have both of those in our lifetime. We will never get a Pluto return, unless, of course, we live until we're 248, which isn't really a reality, at least not right now. Or maybe that will come about in Pluto and Aquarius. We'll learn how to regenerate ourselves. We will really reinvent ourselves and live for a very, very, very long time. That's a reality too, in a way, but it takes me away from what I wanted to talk about. When Pluto squares itself and when Pluto opposes itself, remember what I said about stripping away veneers? And it does, that's what it does. The things that have held things together, but they're veneers, they're just a false surface, if you like. It's what's underneath it that really matters. So when we have a Pluto square Pluto, we are looking at something fundamental, aspects of our life, not just one, being stripped away. And it's exposing things that are very deep within us. And these can often be fears, they can be habits, they can be all sorts of opinions, and they need changing. And a lot of things that happen in childhood that we've stored away and we don't think about anymore, childhood memories, these are the ones that are exposed. And as little people, we have made understandings, especially out of the difficulties we've faced in childhood. The upsets perhaps a divorce has created, or some bullying at school, or whatever it is, they've been stored in our unconscious mind. And now with a Pluto square Pluto, Pluto opposition Pluto, we're revisiting that. We are having to reprocess it and understand why this is playing into the situations that you are having. What happens on Pluto square Pluto, Pluto opposition Pluto, is that we find ourselves in life-threatening situations. Now, that doesn't mean, we're going to die in the sense of, there's danger like that. It can be the things that threaten the structures we have created in our lives to protect us. They're stripped away, so now we don't have them. That's what it really means. And just to give you a little bit more information, if you are born 1983, 1984, then you are having your Pluto square during 2023-2024. Pluto was in Scorpio or went into Scorpio in 1983, and it went all the way through Scorpio until 1995. So at some point, all of you who are born in that 20-year cycle will have a Pluto square Pluto. But those of you born 1983, 84, who are 40 years old, having it now, you're going through it now. The same with Pluto opposition. Pluto happens in your mid-80s. If you're born in 1938, 1939, then you will be at your Pluto opposition. And Pluto was in Leo then, when you were born, and that goes through from 1938 to 1957. So all that group, the Pluto in Leo generation, the me generation, as it was called, are going to face the same thing. Remember, the image of things being stripped away and you are stripped naked, that's also shining a light into your inner vaults, which have a lot to do with childhood experience and childhood memories, things that we've buried because we either couldn't deal with them at the time, or we just don't choose to remember. But if they're important for us to remember and reprocess, they'll come out. And that's the reaction we will be having to the situations in 2023, 2024 that seem to threaten our survival. Now, there's another whole group who will be having a very powerful Pluto event, and those of you who are born in the first degree of the fixed signs. So that's the first degree of Aquarius, the first degree of Leo, the first degree of Taurus, the first degree of Scorpio. And it's not just this, we know the sun is there. So I would say to you, if you've got a birthday 19th, 20th of January, if you've got a birthday 20th, 21st of April, if you've got a birthday 21st, 22nd, even 23rd of October, Scorpio, and Leo, of course, if you're born 22nd of July, 23rd of July, then Pluto is very definitely aspecting your sun as we speak, and it's certainly going to be a big, powerful year for you. But of course, if you know that you've got planets at 0 degrees of the fixed signs, Aquarius, Leo, Taurus, Scorpio, Pluto will be impacting those planets and giving you a similar experience. It means it's a transformational experience, may be hard to go through. The events that happen to you, you won't see coming. But once you're through the other side of them, you will be a very different person. And that's a good thing, because you will have been changed at the core. This is the same for 0 degrees, 1 degree of the fixed signs, rising or culminating. That means you've got Aquarius, Leo, 0 degrees, Aquarius, Leo, Taurus, or Scorpio rising, or you've got 1 degrees of Aquarius, Leo, Taurus, or Scorpio on your MCIC axis. These are going to be people who will go through great transformation by the events that happen in their lives. Now, I want to mention another little thing that I think is worth bearing in mind. It's something I'm exploring at the moment. I haven't necessarily come down really hard on it, but I'm thinking about it. And it's this idea that every living thing has a consciousness. A plant has a consciousness, an animal has a consciousness, and of course, we have consciousness. And we could say that the planet Earth, has a consciousness. And in fact, back in the 1970s, Sir James Lovelock came up with the Gaia theory, that the Earth was an entity that had its own biosphere, if you like, all those things. Now, science didn't greet that with approval. In fact, most scientists rejected it, didn't like it at all, thought it was silly. However, strangely enough, kind of recently, Gaia is getting more of an it's getting more accepted by some scientists. And maybe this too is a reflection of Pluto in Aquarius. We're going to be taking on some wild, wild ideas. Well, they seem wild at the time, but in fact, you know, they're going to bring us to a greater understanding of how the world works, how the earth works, how the cosmos works. And along this line of thinking, Pluto is, as I said a little bit earlier, about 4 billion miles away from us, you know. And scientists who look at astrology and say, what a load of codswallop. You know, the idea that anything out there in the solar system has anything to do with us, whether we have red hair or a hot temper. No, it doesn't. That's silly. But wait a minute. If we have the idea that everything has a consciousness, including the planets, that means planets as far out as Pluto having a conscious, I don't want to say a conscious awareness of itself because that's really mad, but we could say that it is alive, it has some consciousness. Then we have a kind of fabric for understanding how consciousness is, we are all intermingled, we are affected. Now, I apologize if some of you think I've lost my mind, but it's something I'm working on, and maybe it's something that you might like to explore and take on board. So where am I going now? Yes, one more thing to mention before we go into sign by sign. Pluto is not personal. I have mentioned that. It only becomes personal when it's connected to your personal planets and points in your chart and the house it's in. That makes it accessible. We understand more about what Pluto means in your particular life from those things. Otherwise, Pluto in Scorpio, Pluto in Gemini, whatever it is, it's meaningless, really. It's only where it is and what it connects to that is really important. And it's the same, really, with a Pluto transit. Now, Pluto is going to be in Aquarius for 20 years. So you don't have 20 years of same old, same old, same old. No, you don't. You're only going to have your Plutonic experience when Pluto makes a connection with your natal planets and your natal angles, ascendant, descendant, midheaven, Imam Coli. That's the only time. That's really, really important to bear in mind. And the other thing to bear in mind, I've given you a lot of ideas about how Pluto works, what the process is, transformation, elimination, and all these things that promote an extraordinary level of growth at core level. But also two other words are really important that we need to examine when we are having a Pluto transit, of really issues about power and control. And I'm going to explore that a little bit more as we do go sign by sign. So let's begin, and we're going to begin in Aquarius because, of course, Pluto is coming into your sign. And if you are, let me put it this way, I do get this question asked a lot in my comments section, and sometimes in direct emails to me. Where do I read this from? Am I taking it from my sun sign or from my ascending sign, and therefore looking at the house it's in? And on this occasion, as we are looking at Pluto going through the signs, if you know your ascendant and you do know where Pluto is in terms of the house it's in, then you need to take notice of the house I'm talking about and see it as, I'm just about to talk about Aquarius, Sun Aquarius, but it's also Aquarius rising. Well, not Aquarius rising, not 1, 2 of Aquarius rising, because we're at the very, very beginning of this Pluto transit. Now, sometimes when I do my other forecasts, especially my written forecasts, I never ever want you to look at it from the perspective of your ascending sign, because when I write as if I'm talking to a Leo or I'm talking to a Scorpio. So it is about who you are and how you respond to those influences as a sun sign. But it is slightly different with Pluto going through the sign and the houses. as it is indeed with Saturn going through the houses. So let's begin with Aquarius, going through your first house. So, of course, if you are an Aquarian and you're born on January the 19th, 20th, 21st, you have already got Pluto influencing your life. And we can look at the sun in the sense of the self. So it is all about the self. And we can look at the first house because that is also about the self or the persona, what we project of ourselves out to the world. So looking at Pluto going through the first house and looking at Pluto in Aquarius, it's very personal. And we're looking at the idea of stripping away the veneers that we've had. Well, they'll be stripped away for us, really, in a way. That means our appearance may change. Our image most certainly will change. How people view us as Aquarians, or Pluto in the first house, how people view us will change. So that you are not the same person as you used to be. But of course, Pluto will also influence your personal ambitions and desires. So those will change over the period that Pluto is affecting you. And what you thought you wanted and what you thought you were aiming for, what you thought was going to be there for you in the future is not. So that has to be changed and transformed. Pluto going through the first house, Pluto in Aquarius, if you're an Aquarian, it's about not caring about the superficial things of life. It's about deep, things that are deep, things that are meaningful. And so during a Pluto transit, you're much more likely to be thinking about what it all means. You're not interested in the superficiality of it all. You want to really, really know what's going on deep down. Now, remember, I've mentioned the idea of power and control. These are going to be issues that come into your life now, Aquarius, and also if you have Aquarius rising. It is important for us to have self-control. And that is what we need to develop under Pluto. But self-control is different from wanting to control situations and control others. You do see that there's a real difference between those two factors. So that you will be presented with situations that mean you don't have control of them. You just don't. And it's very hard because you will struggle to regain control. And if something is taken away from you, stripped away from you, lost, you fear it's going to be lost, you will want to hang on to it by any and every means. But in fact, the treatment, if you like, is to let go. Because whatever is struggling to go from your life, or from whatever goes from your life, is meant to go, because that's no longer part of your future and where you're going. But it is very personal, and you will feel it very personally. And, the idea is to have that kind of control of yourself, managing the circumstances that are taking things away from you. And in the process, you will gain so much about yourself. You will change and transform because of the journeys that you will be going on. So if we look at Capricorn, we come to Pluto in the second house. Now, of course, Capricorn, you have Pluto in your own sign since 2007. So I know a lot of you have been to hell and back, and you're thinking, oh, my goodness, that's over. I don't have to worry about Pluto anymore. Well, Pluto will be going through your second house in a solar way, if you're a Capricorn. But also, if you know you've got Capricorn rising, it's going to be going through your second house. And it has a continuation from when it was going through your first house. You took everything very personally when it happened in your first house. A lot of things really affected you deeply personally. A lot of things were changed and transformed about you as a person. In the second house, it's more about your value system. What are your values? And that can be material values, and it can be the value you place on yourself. And of course, in a vacuum, we can think about ourselves and what we have to offer the world. And maybe we're lucky enough to feel good about who we are and what we offer the world. And we're happy with our value system. We're happy with our finances. We are comfortable with it all. Well, Pluto comes along and some aspects of all that will change. So it may be that your income will change. It doesn't mean it will go down necessarily. It could be transformed in a good way. You could make more money than you ever made in your life. But it'll have a consequence because that's Pluto. It isn't, if it's a great experience that's given to you and you celebrate it and believe how fortunate you are, remember, it's got a sting in the tail like Scorpio, and you'll pay for it in some way. In reverse, almost better. You find yourself stripped of some aspect of your income or your instruments of survival. Let's look at it that way. You're going to have to find other routes to find that security, to get your income. And then out of that comes great growth, and it's always about growth. It's also always about core change. And I think too, it's what others think of you. I talked a little bit about how good it is to, if in your own sense, you have a great sense of your own value. That's good if you have that. But a lot of us don't have that because we tend to see our value through other people's eyes. So it's what people pay us for what they think we're worth. We do a job, what do you pay me? And if it isn't very much, you kind of think, I'm not worth very much. But there's also that idea that if people treat you badly, they don't respect you. They don't respect your values and your value. That's deeply unsettling, and it can have a very, very deep effect on our well-being because it is important to feel good about ourselves without getting, being selfish and all those other self-oriented words. It's about having a sense of self. So the Pluto transit to anything personal planets in your second house will have that effect. It is all about money, what you earn, what you have, your assets, your resources, but your resources, not just in the sense of material resources, but your physical resources, your emotional resources. That's what that second house is all about, and how other people view you and how you view yourself. And that's all going to be mightily transformed as Pluto moves through that house, connecting with planets and points in your natal chart. So if we come to Sagittarius now, for Sun Sagittarians, if that's all you know, and the solar perspective still has an important part to play, or if you've got Sagittarius rising, then Pluto will be moving through your third house. And the third house is where we form our thought structures. It's our outlook. It's our mental processes. It's how we communicate our ideas, opinions, and our feelings. It's how we exchange our ideas with others. It's about knowledge. It's about, deep understandings. And with Pluto moving through this third house, all of that is going to change. Your outlook will change. Now, it may change physically because you'll move to, a different place. So you have a different real outlook. You'll look through your window and see different surroundings. And the third house has a lot to do with your neighborhood, has a lot to do with your very small world. So it could mean that your neighborhood is changing, or you've changed neighborhoods. And so things look very different in an everyday setting. But of course, it's more important than that. It's more about your outlook. And Pluto will challenge your preconceived opinions. It may inspire you to learn more. So you may go back to school, or you may decide to take up a study course, or you will acquire new skills. And in general, I think what happens with Pluto is that the idea of a small world is kind of broken down, and a bigger space is now being looked at. So your thought processes, your interests, the things you want to talk about and explore, they're going to be much more part of a bigger world. You're going to be more aware how other people, other nations, if you like, other cultures impact your thinking and your outlook. So Pluto's transformative effect is very important. And I think you can hear that this sounds extremely positive, but Pluto is never easy. And it means that you're probably going to be challenged by all of this. For instance, maybe you are an activist in certain things, and Pluto will inspire you to become even more of an activist. You're going to meet with opposition. You may even be threatened by opposition, and you have choices to make. Do you go back and think about it a bit more and, you know, not go forward, or do you fight fire with fire, so to speak, and you go on? As I said, Pluto threatens our survival in some way, and if your survival to you means your views of the world, your things that you are passionate about, if they are threatened by a bigger, you know, source, then you stand up and fight. And Pluto, sort of a higher octave, well, it's not really a higher octave of Mars, but its connection with Mars and Scorpio means, you know, stand up and fight. Also, the idea that you may be challenged mentally during this time. Is it that you undergo some kind of experience that really does threaten your psyche, that you're, you know, you have some extraordinary experience that means, you know, the way you look at things isn't the way you used to do because of the experience that you had. And because we express, or our voice is heard, this is the way we make our voice heard in the third house, that's going to change. Now, it can mean something very, very pedestrian. It can mean you're using a new set of speakers, but, you know, something really much more powerful. Maybe you'll have a powerful soapbox in order to spread your ideas. Again, remember, they'll be challenged because of Pluto journey through this third house. When it connects with planets and points in your natal chart, it's going to give you a challenge. You're going to be opposed. You're going to feel threatened in some way. So if we come to the fourth house, and we're looking at, if you're a Sun Scorpio, that's all you know, then we're looking at a Pluto fourth house solar transit. But if you know that you have Scorpio rising, especially if you have 0 or 1, 2 degrees of Scorpio rising, then, you know, Pluto's impact on that fourth house is obviously going to be much more immediate. So these are the roots of life, the fourth house. And it's also worth remembering that the first house, the fourth house, the seventh house, and the 10th house are what we call cardinal houses, active houses. They're much more dynamic. So when Pluto passes through the first house, the fourth house, the seventh house, the 10th house, it's going to have a much more profound effect on your whole life. So here we are in the fourth house with the roots of life. So this means it's your ancestry. It's how far back do your roots go? Or maybe you only can go back in memory as far as your grandparents. And you can remember things about your grandparents. And so as Pluto is moving through the fourth house, there are experiences related to your grandparents, or things your grandparents have told you, whatever it was, things that happened to your grandparents somehow impact. There's something in there when you are meeting new circumstances that make you feel, you know, threatened in some way, or take away your power, which I think amounts to almost the same thing. But it can be ancestors going back generations, and of course you have no memory of what that may be. But, you know, if you read a lot that I've written, and I'm particularly interested in the fourth house and the echoes of our ancestors coming through, and that are situations we meet in our present life, relate to what our ancestors have experienced, and it's our job to process them somehow. And a very simple thing to do with Pluto going through your fourth house would be to look into your ancestry, to make discoveries, because remember, Pluto is a revelatory planet. Things that have been in the darkness come into the light. And, I think that idea of illumination coming from the past, just using that statement, is a very powerful little sentence that will go with your fourth house transit of Pluto. But again, we're looking at our childhood. I mean, you may have had a very, very happy childhood, and you may have had wonderful parents, and your early life was not marred in any way. But that's not usual. Mostly all of us have had some childhood experience that terrified us, that made a scar on our psyche, on our soul in some cases. And when Pluto comes along, connects with a planet in your fourth house, or a planet and point from its Pluto's transit for its position, then that will take you back there. And you may find initially it's quite difficult to think, oh, which is the experience that this plays into? But the first thing that comes into your mind will be, when you think about that in relation to a situation you are finding very threatening, what does this take you back to, and how did it work out? These are just simple mechanisms to use with this. You still have to process it. But a lot with Pluto is digging around in that black sludge that, is where we bury things. And, when after a while they don't smell too good, they really don't do us a lot of good. So issues with your parents. And it may be that, depending on the age you are, that you're now in a position of having to take care of your parents or one parent. Or it may be that a parent you haven't seen for years comes back into your life, or something like that. So parents are an important part of your fourth house Pluto transit. And it may be that sometimes we have to rid ourselves of the powerful impact our parents or one parent made on us, that hold us back or have caused us to make certain choices that may be now, we don't necessarily regret them, but maybe we need to make new choices. So again, let's look at it on a more pedestrian level, when Pluto does connect with a planet or point in regard to its position in the fourth house, its transit of the fourth house, then you could make a huge move. So we're not just talking going to another house in the neighborhood, unless it was a totally different kind of house, something that was so radically different from anywhere you'd lived before. That might be Pluto in the fourth. But we're probably talking about, another country, another state, so that you will be making a huge move somewhere else. Remember, the fourth house is about your physical home, as well as your psychic home, your sanctuary. So Pluto's movement through here is very much tied up with making a move of home in your four square walls, as it is about some aspect of your psyche being moved and shifted. And of course, Pluto's going to be going through the fourth house for about 20 years or so. So of course, there's probably going to be an opportunity to make a move. But at some point in that 20 years, if you do make a house move and Pluto is connected at that time, then it's going to be massive. It's going to be a huge life move. Yes, I think that sort of covers fourth house stuff. Although I suppose I want to say too, I talk about your parents playing an important part in this Pluto transit. And I use the idea that maybe you have to take care of your parents. You're at that age, they need looking after. But it can also be that something a parent does you're now forced to look at that parent in a new way and reform your attitude to that parent. That might be very painful. So there's a tier of meaning with a Pluto transit, and these are just a few of the leading components of that transit, Scorpio. So let's now go to Libra. You're a Sun Libra and you don't know what your rising sign is, and Pluto in the 5th house. Again, in a way, you can, it's easier to work with in the 5th house, because in a way, if you know that the 5th house is your creative center and your creativity is being transformed by Pluto, you can actively and consciously work with Pluto in this area. There are many ways to be creative, and I say this all the time because sometimes I say to my clients, this is an opportunity for you to express your creative gifts. And they say to me, oh, I'm not creative. I'm not one of those creatives. But you can be creative with finance, and you can be creative in the kitchen. There are so many ways you can be creative. It doesn't have to mean you've got a paintbrush and canvas and, whatever. But it might be that during the course of this Pluto transit that you do find your core creativity. You do connect with your inner muse, and that you do start doing something that we would all recognize as creative. And you might feel that it's coming from a source that you hadn't known or experienced before. You might even think you're channeling some kind of new force, or someone else is channeling you. You're channeling someone else, and it's allowing you to do what you could never do before. You may decide to go into print. You may decide to write and publish, although that's more 9th house, but you can do it from the 5th house as well. And you may journal. And I love that, because if we keep a sort of journal, it's so fascinating to go back over the years and have a look at your thoughts and the things that were priorities at that time that aren't priorities now. So journaling is a good process. And in fact, if you are a writer and you've got Pluto going through your 5th house, you are likely to write your magnum opus during this time. You are going to be going into the depths of your subject, or into the depths in order to create a work of fiction. And it's going to be massive. It's going to change you as you write it. It's going to change your life in the wake of it. Creativity is also procreativity. So there are many layers to this as well. You may have your first child as Pluto transits the 5th house. Or it may be that you have a child, and because it's during your Pluto 5th house transit, that child is your transformer. You are transformed through having that child. The effect that child has on you is transformational. It could be the most wonderful, talented, extraordinary child that you're going to have to take leaps yourself in order to manage this extraordinary child. Or it could be that this child has some issues. Again, you may be called upon to handle that with love, of course, but your creative offering is proving challenging. Love affairs. Remember, the 5th house is ruled by Leo, and therefore it's the heart. And so passionate affairs can come about with Pluto in the 5th house. But remember, Pluto in Aquarius, if you know what I'm talking about, Pluto in Aquarius in your 5th house, if you're a Libra. The thing to remember is that phrase, creator destroyer, so that what may be initially passionate and really the most amazing experience you ever had with another person can ultimately destroy some elements of your life. It's worth bearing in mind. This is all Pluto in the 5th. Last but not least, this is where the self is, the ego. So we think about transformation and the ego. And of course, the idea is that you have to rise above the little me, the little ego, into the bigger self, the higher self. So I've used this idea about the situations that threaten you, which have a Pluto signature, are all about recognizing or being able to view them and handle them from that higher self perspective. And out of this fifth house transit will come an acknowledgement of your higher self, an understanding of how that is and how it benefits you as a human being. So coming along to Pluto in the sixth house, and we're looking at Virgo rising, or if you know, Pluto is going through your sixth house, and you are a Virgo, let's put it that way too. This is I always say when I come to the sixth house, people don't understand the sixth house. And I remember when I was learning astrology and I was told, you know, the key words for the sixth house, work and health. And I think, oh, what on earth do those two things have to do with each other? But they do. And the reason that unites those two are systems. You have a health system and you have a system that works. No, let me clarify that a bit. You have a daily routine. That's how your day is structured. That's how your week is structured. Your month is structured. Your year is structured. The patterning that goes along with that gives your life a structure. It's a system. And it's comfortable to have that. Well, imagine Pluto coming along into the sixth house is going to change all that. Your daily system is going to be upended. How you work is going to be different. Your workplace may be different. The people you work with are different people, so that everything that has formed some kind of structure to your life has given it almost without thinking. You know, we don't think about what we do necessarily when we wake up. We usually clean our teeth, go downstairs, have a cup of coffee or something, you know, and we don't even think about it. It's part of our daily routine. So imagine if suddenly you were in a different set of circumstances and that didn't apply anymore. You'd have to have a different routine. And it's in changing your routines and changing your systems that different aspects of yourself are now being touched on and brought to life. Remember that death and rebirth of Pluto, so that it will create that kind of environment in which you are forced to change your system of how things work in life. And of course, it can be work as well. So you may very well change jobs, or your job circumstances may change so that you are in a very different workplace. So that's just the pedestrian aspect of Pluto going through the sixth house. But the sixth house is so much more than that. It is about, well, I like this idea that the sixth house has something to do with seva, S-E-V-A, which is, you know, your work is your spiritual path, the things you do, offering yourself up to others is your seva, so that you don't seek spiritual enlightenment per se, because it is in what you do, the way you work, especially when you're doing that work for others, that is in fact your spiritual path. So the sixth house is also the path of the spirit as well. So things that challenge and threaten you are likely to test your spirituality and how comfortable you are with, you know, what your beliefs are. And it may also have to do with finding a sense of service, finding your sense of purpose with Pluto. It may bring to life a whole new direction in which you should be going, your life purpose revealed, the sense in many cases that you need to do more for others, but as an act of service and devotion. Last but not least, health. Well, you know, sometimes when Pluto goes through your sixth house, you do have a health concern. And the purpose of that health concern is to get rid of bad habits and to make you aware that this isn't a good route to go on. But it's not the only meaning of Pluto through the 6th house. It's just that it can have many manifestations, as it will, as you go through the next 20 years. And during the next 20 years, you're likely to have a health issue, aren't you? So, but with Pluto, it's a little bit more challenging. Therefore, you need more resources to deal with it. And it may feel as though it is threatening your survival. Remember all those things, because when it happens, you'll be able to call on these words, Pluto in the 6th house, that give you the ability to work through it. So here we come to Leo and the 7th house. And this is interesting because, of course, you've had Saturn moving through your 7th house for 2.5 years, and you probably lit a few fireworks when finally Saturn moseyed out of Aquarius and into Pisces. But now Pluto is coming in there. But it's different. Pluto is not Saturn, and you've got to remember that it's, it's only when Pluto is going to make a connection to some other planet in your chart or something that you have in your 7th house that's going to bring it alive, so to speak, and going to present you with its properties of elimination, transformation, reformation, creative destruction. As a rule of thumb, when Pluto goes through the 7th house, it's other people who seem to be the agency through which Pluto is working. And that's a good way to put it, because you can meet someone who is powerful and has a powerful effect on your thinking, your way of life, your future direction. So a person can personify Pluto for you and change you dramatically. But we can also see that a relationship itself can be radically transformed with Pluto in the 7th house. Well, it's going to take 20 years. So there's going to be more than one relationship that's going to show you Pluto's process of reformation. You may have a divorce, you may remarry in these next 20 years. You may marry for the first time in these 20 years. Or you may experience a breakup of a relationship that is so powerful that you really aren't open to a relationship for quite some considerable time. You never know what's coming. Remember, Pluto has a helmet that renders him invisible. So you won't be able to say, oh, I think it's this. No, you won't, because events will take over from your being able to, prepare for them. That's what's going to happen. So you could have a very powerful and passionate encounter with someone, and your life is foreverably changed by that person and by that relationship. We also have to look at the idea of power and control. And Leo, you are a fixed sign, and it is really, really important for you to have control over things. That way you feel comfortable. You're comfortable in the driver's seat. You really don't like being a passenger. You want to know what's going on. You want to have your fingers in every pie. This doesn't happen when Pluto is going through the 7th house. It's almost as though others take away your power. And you have to understand, and it's not the same as Pluto going through your 1st house, but it has the issues of power and control are still there. And so you may experience others taking control of you. How you handle that is the important thing, because we have to understand. We have to understand that other people have their own sovereignty as well. We can neither control them, nor should they control us. Everybody has their own sovereignty. And that's a very important lesson to learn while Pluto is going through the 7th house. And respecting that and understanding it is going to make this transit much easier. But it can also be that you enter power struggles with people, or power struggles just seem to erupt. And they can go on for a long time. Remember, Pluto isn't, a day by day, it begins and it's over. It isn't like that. It's going to take you through many many places as it completes its cycle. So power struggles are going to occur in more than one area of life and with more than one person or one group of people. And it's the journey with understanding how to have self-control and how to protect your borders without denying other people their borders and their sovereignty. That's the issue that you're going to be faced with. But certainly your love life, your business life, if you're in partnerships, going to hell and back with Pluto is one thing you might like to think of. But you know, it's important you make that journey, because as I said, if there's one thing that we could say that is generic to all of us, is that we are absolutely transformed. We are never the same person once we've had a really big Pluto transit. So let's come now to Cancer. Cancer, Pluto is moving through your 8th house, and the 8th house is another mysterious area. It is Pluto's realm. So in a way, Pluto is in its natural house. If you're a Scorpio and you don't know your time of birth, this is what you need to think of: Pluto in the 8th house. If you've got Scorpio rising, especially if you've got 0, 1, 2 degrees of Scorpio rising, you're in this situation right now. So Pluto and its principles of death and rebirth are particularly profound here, so that you will experience the death of something that has previously been a pillar of your life. In other words, you've always believed in this, and now you can't believe in that anymore. And you have to really rethink something along those lines. It may be that something that you know, this is that call the house of financial and emotional exchange as well. So it is a lot to do with how other people impact your life again, but in the way of what they bring you, what you receive from them. I do call this the house of receivership. And yes, it can mean you may go into receivership while Pluto moves through this house. But really, it's more about what you receive from other people, how that changes and is transformed. And so in terms of relationships, this can be a very powerful planetary transit, because you are asked in some way to accept what others are giving you, and learning at the same time how to still be your own entity while being rather swept up in other people's power and control over you. We had an issue with Leo and the 7th house in power and control, and we got it a little bit again with you, Cancer, and the 8th house. Inheritances, settlements, these are monetary things. Well, an inheritance doesn't have to be monetary, but it's usually some form of an asset, a material asset, so that we can receive an inheritance, we can receive a settlement while Pluto is going through our 8th house. The thing being, because it's Pluto, it's not Jupiter, it's Pluto, that there's always a cost to this. There's always some kind of legal issue that ties everything up in knots. There's a power struggle. And it can go on for a very, very long time. Maybe ultimately you'll be triumphant and you will get your inheritance, you will get your settlement, but it's going to take a long time, and it's going to take you into some very dark places. The idea of receivership here, I've already mentioned, yes, it's possible that, you know, maybe your finances will get into such you know, they'll reach a point where that's the best solution. But I have to say that I think for a lot of people, even though the idea that you're a bankrupt isn't so great and you may feel terrible about it, and maybe you feel some aspects of yourself have been stripped away that you don't like anymore. But it does relieve you of the burden of all that finance. And so your finances are transformed, even if you haven't liked the way they've been transformed. And the same thing will happen if you inherit a huge amount of money. That may sound great, but guess what? There are going to be a lot of problems that come with that huge amount of money. And as you know, when you hear all those lottery winners who won huge amounts of money, when you revisit them, they have stories to tell. And that's always something to bear in mind, even about the good gifts that Pluto appears to give you. I think also, you know, this issue of, well, I want to go back here and think about if you have planets in the 8th house, for instance, or you have Pluto in the 8th natally, that this does often represent a real pull into the unseen world, whether that means you're a microbiologist or, you know, those kind of things, or whether it is to do with the occult and crime and mysteries and psychology. So that Pluto in the 8th house can either stir those ambitions, it can make your work that exists in these areas more powerful, but let's not forget creator destroyer. And sometimes a Pluto 8th house transit, if you are meddling or in areas to do with the occult or unseen things, they can backfire on you. And that's something just to be aware about without being fearful about it. And we'll talk about fear when I come to the end. So finally, we're in the last sort of few groups here. I'm going to come to Gemini. And that's if you're a Sun Gemini and you don't know your rising sign, or if you have Gemini rising and you know Pluto is passing through your 9th house. This is actually, I think, the best house for Pluto to go through. You tend to get more benefits out of a Pluto 9th house transit. The 9th house, which is the realm really of higher knowledge, it's about the higher expression of things. So to have Pluto going through here often means you have a marvelous opening to things that you want to learn about, that you want to experience, that it takes you to the max. And you do learn extraordinary things. You have extraordinary experiences with Pluto in the 9th. I mean, sometimes you have extraordinary experiences in foreign countries because the 9th house is a house of far horizons. And so we do look in terms of distance in miles, every bit as much as we think about distance in thinking and experience and all those other things as well. And it may even promote a move abroad. So you move to another country, or you marry into another culture, or you work with another culture, and this transforms you. You're now looking at the world through another nation's eyes or another culture's eyes. So these are things that we can hear are going to be of great benefit to you. But remember, Pluto is never an easy customer. So the circumstances you find yourself in are going to be challenging. And when we think about it, if we do live in a new culture, even if at first we might feel kind of excited about, where we are and what we're learning, at some point we'll come up against a clash of the cultures, and that causes us deep problems. So we can look at it in that way. If you know Pluto's in your 9th house, you may find over the course of this transit that you will be in that situation where you experience a clash of cultures. And of course, it's the ability to transform your own ideas your own understandings, your own knowledge that's going to help you work through that transition, that time of transition. But Pluto is also about learning. So again, you may take yourself off to university. You may decide to do a postgraduate course. You may have a doctorate. So Pluto is in this area of academia and higher learning, and kind of inspiring you to get an immense amount of knowledge, which in turn changes you and your accreditation. So instead of just being Mr. or Miss, whoever you are, you're now doctor, or you've got letters behind your name. That can be a Pluto transit. Can also be that events in other countries or events in other people's lives who are either from other countries or live in a distant place from you impact your life, and you are changed by what happens over there. And I think in particular, if we have an analogy here about so many people, certainly in Great Britain, so many young men who were inspired to go and fight for Ukraine, go and join the Ukrainian soldiers, to train and join them. That is a very Pluto 9th house kind of effect. And so it has its aspect of courage and bravery, and also what I've talked about, your threat, a life and death situation, a threat to your existence in real terms, as well as perhaps what a threat to your existence, a change in belief systems or new knowledge can present to you. So here we come to Taurus, or if you've got Taurus rising, Pluto will be going through your 10th house. And this is another of those active cardinal houses. So it has an effect on your whole life. It isn't just one thing. Whatever happens in that house doesn't stay in that house. It goes everywhere. And it's very important to remember that. And so we do think about the 10th house as our place in the world, how we go out and meet the world and do things that have an effect in the wider world. It's about our career. It's about our ambitions. It's the material world. But very much like the 4th house, because the MCIC axis is called the parental axis. So everything I've said about Scorpio and the 4th house, Pluto in the 4th house, has some relevance to you, Taurus, with Pluto in the 10th house. That there are matters relating to your parents and possibly your grandparents that become all-powerful to you during this Pluto transit. Yes, do you have to take responsibility for a parent or both parents or your grandparents? Depends what age you are. Does it mean that there are issues you will be facing with your parents that bring up a lot of childhood issues? Is it a crisis between the you your parents wanted or want you to be and the you who you have become? I think that's supremely important. If you take nothing else from this interpretation of Pluto going through your 10th house, take that one. Are you a reflection of what your parents wanted you to be or want you to be, or are you now claiming your own place on the world, in the world? And that's going to be difficult. It surely is. And I think even if you don't have your parents with you anymore, Pluto in the 10th house can still throw up situations that bring you to that same point, that cause you to question, are you a product of your parents' aspirations, beliefs, and handling, or are you now yourself and embracing all these things on your own terms? The biggest message, Pluto through the 10th. But yes, you may rise to power. I often think of Putin with Pluto in the 10th house. That's an extreme version of a natal chart with Pluto on the 10th house, power crazy. So that you get an opportunity to be in a position of power. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean you get to be the CEO of an incredible company, or suddenly as an artist you receive great fame. It can, but we can sometimes assume power in quite a small situation. And it's being able to see whether you're abusing your own power, or are you subject to the abuse of someone else's power. These are going to be issues too that are going to happen during a Pluto transit of your 10th house. I talked about a phoenix rising out of the ashes much earlier on, really in reference to Scorpio. So reinvention is a very Plutonic thing. It's a very Scorpio thing. Pluto people reinvent themselves. So the chances are that you will reinvent yourself during this Pluto transit of the 10th. It may mean you take on a whole new career. Maybe before you're a nurse and now you're a landscape gardener. Well, that's a sound, quite possible and easy. But sometimes the rise to power is included in this. So you are reinvented. People see you in a very, very different way. And you may consciously decide to change career, radically. Now, your material world may change as well. What used to be in place, what were your material circumstances, have now changed. They're changed because something happened. They didn't necessarily change because of what you did, but they've changed. And it is in the reestablishment, the reformation of your life, because certain things are no longer what they were. That is what that Pluto process is all about. Now, sometimes indeed people do come to power and fame on a Pluto transit of their 10th house. And while that can be, an accolade, it carries terrible responsibilities. And that's something you will come to understand as Pluto moves through your 10th house. You may be listening to me and thinking, I really want fame. I want to get there. Remember, it's going to have a cost. And are you ready for it? That's maybe something we need to consider. So now let's come to Aries and Pluto in the 11th house. Now, if you've just listened to Pluto in the 10th house in regard to Taurus rising or Sun Taurus, some of that will be relevant to you. And it might be worth going back and listening to what is being said to Taurus or someone with Pluto in the 10th house. Because when Pluto enters your 11th house, it's the effects of what all those things have had on you that you now do something about. So the big question often is, in the 10th house, there is a strive for power and achievement and success. When we get to the 11th house, it's all about, what does it mean? Am I fulfilled? Is this really what it's about? Is this really it? And so you question what really matters in your life, what will make you have that sense of fulfillment. So to a certain extent, it's a change in your outlook, but in a really, really deep way. It's not so much about you anymore, me. It's about the collective. It's about what that means to other people, to the community you are in, to the to the nation you're with. It's the collective. What is your role in the collective? And is what you do helping other people? So you can develop a strong humanitarian kind of drive while Pluto is going through your 11th house. In Pluto in the 3rd house, I talk about being an activist and how that can come about. You may become an activist about something while Pluto is in your 3rd. But also, if you are an activist already, you may come up against opposition to your activism. And therefore, it's do or die. It's like, do I go forward with this? Do I do my all for this? Or is that it? Well, it's a little bit like that in the 11th house too. Are you going to give your all to some humanitarian cause, or some cause or project that involves other people? Or are you not? Is that kind of do or die? My survival is threatened by this. Do I plow on forward and transform everything that way? Or do I decide that that's not for me? And my beliefs and my drives and my interests and my humanitarian spirit is now not what it was. It has changed by circumstances, and I feel different about what I'm doing. Now, the other thing about Pluto in the 11th house, and we've got to remember, is, yeah, it may be there for 20 years, but you're not going to have the same old experience but every day in every week of 20 years. It's only when Pluto is activated in your own chart from that position, your personal planets and points, that's when it's going to be, that's going to come into your awareness. So collaborations are the heart center, really, of the 11th house. And sometimes Aries is very good at doing things independently. You're an independent spirit. So sometimes working with groups of people isn't your métier. You're not very good at it. You don't like it. You know, it's my way or the highway. But things are reversed with Pluto in the 11th house. It's their way or the highway. So you come up against those situations where your independence and your ideas, your being, in fact, is really threatened by the group's view of you or the collective's view of you. And it's how you come through that in the sense of being transformed by it. That's important. That's what Pluto is doing there, going through your 11th house. Now, this is also an area where we think about higher paths. So it is always worth considering that your experiences are offering you the choice of taking the higher path. And that is probably something you should really, really take away from this interpretation. Sun Aries, if you only know you're an Aries, or if you've got Aries rising, Pluto going through your 11th house, you know, it's that the situation that may be threatening your survival, the issue over which there is power and control, is probably saying, find your higher path, because it's by taking the higher path that you will move through this and sustain a kind of growth from it. It's a very interesting area, this 11th house. And I think if you're consciously aware of what Pluto can offer you here, it can be a very gratifying kind of experience, because you'll check yourself when you come into a clashing situation with other people or groups, big groups, not necessarily small groups. And you will question your identity and what it means to be part of a collective and how that fits into your cosmic view of things and your kind of personality and all those things. So it's helping you in a way to grow immeasurably through your connections with other people and in connection with your personal ideals, even belief systems, all of those kind of things. So finally, we are at Pisces and the 12th house. So Aquarius is the sign that precedes yours, it's your neighboring sign. And so you had Saturn going through Aquarius since 1981. What are we talking about? 2021. And so now you have Pluto. But remember, Pluto is very slow moving, so that there'll be many times when everything I'm saying now won't be in effect, or you won't be thinking about it, but you will think about it when it connects with a planet or point to that Pluto transit in your natal chart. You know what I'm talking about by now. So the 12th house is a very interesting house. It's the final house of the zodiac circle. Pisces is the final sign of the zodiac circle, right? The house circle, the horoscope circle, and the zodiac circle. So what happens in the final area is that a lot of processing goes on, a lot of dissolution, in that you're dissolving things so that they melt away. And it just reminds me of something a client said to me when I was talking about this the other day. She said, oh, I was just going to say that sometimes I feel like I'm an aspirin dissolving in water. And I thought, oh, that is so descriptive of this 12th house transit. So many things are dissolving. And they may not be dramatic in their effect, but gradually you'll realize things are not what they were. And while this may extend to many aspects of your existence, I think if there is a common kind of experience, it's going to be, again, something linked to your belief system. So that you've always believed things are this way. You always believed things of that person. This is your kind of belief structure, and you live your life by it. So Pluto comes along and, like a wrecking ball, changes it. Your preconceived ideas, belief systems, they're shot. And of course, this happens or matters if you're a very spiritually motivated Piscean or person with, Pluto coming through the 12th house. Because a lot of the things you could set your clock by, so to speak, and the things that you believed were true are now going to be shattered. And a new kind of belief system is going to come out of that. It's not something you can think your way through, though, because it's Pluto and it's a long transit. It's always 2 to 4 years. It's your experiences that are going to amount to a gradual breaking down of that belief system. And out of it comes a new paradigm, a new spirituality. Now, when I was learning astrology, and I had all these old books, sort of written in the 1930s or whatever they were. And there was a huge expansion of astrology in the 70s. But, before that, things were in a very different place. And I remember being taught that the 12th house was the house of undoing, self-undoing, and the house of incarceration. So I thought, oh dear, that sounds absolutely terrible. But there is a sort of sense of that in a modern understanding of the 12th house, in that we choose to cut ourselves off from the mainstream in the 12th house. So cut ourselves off from mainstream opinion, cut ourselves off from the hurly-burly of life. We may have very singular views on this, that, and the other, and very singular spiritual views. So we can also extend that out and see that incarceration means sometimes you're in an institution. You could be in an academic institution. You could be in a hospital, which is an institution. You could be in a prison that's an institution. You could be in a monastery or with some kind of spiritual group that considers itself a kind of institution. So with Pluto going through the 12th house, this may become relevant. And it is your journey with this sense of incarceration or this sense of being isolated from the hurly-burly of everything else. Let's think also of exile. And that's also something that can happen in the 4th house, especially with some of the outer planets in there, the sense that you are exiled from your homeland. In the 12th house, it may not be your homeland that you are exiled from. It is more that you're exiled from a group mind. Remember, the 11th house comes before the 12th. So that you are standing alone in your beliefs, or you are isolated and with us, several other people who are now living this kind of belief structure. There is also this process of death and rebirth that is attached to the 12th house. And depending on your age, but if it is making contact with something in your 12th house, or from the 12th house position, contacting something else. You may find yourself looking at issues to do with life and death. You may even be thinking about your own death and what it means to you and what preparations you should make. But let me bring something that I associate with this, or what happened to me personally, with Pluto in my 12th house, transiting Pluto, coming to my ascendant. This was, I was pregnant with my second child, went into premature labor at 20 weeks, and was forced into hospital on complete bed rest for 8 weeks before he was finally born. So I understood about incarceration. I was in a hospital. I couldn't do anything. My power was taken away from me, Pluto through the 12th house. And of course, bringing a very tiny little being into the world, his prospects of life weren't guaranteed. So I faced a life and death situation with him. Happy to say it all ended happily, and he's fully grown and fully functioning, and the end result was good. But that whole experience of Pluto in the 12th taught me how to be dignified in powerlessness. And that is a very, very potent message of the experience you're going to have with your Pluto 12th house experience. And it's going to be Heinz 57 varieties. You're never going to be sure what will inspire that, but that's what we're looking at. Powerlessness and how to find dignity and purpose in powerlessness. So all 12 signs have gone through. And I think one of the points that I wanted to end with, and it came from your comments and also my mailbag, that people are very fearful about what a Pluto transit may be. And one person really thinking, is this my death? Am I facing my death? And the idea there, I think, is that we've got rather confused with Pluto and that keyword principle, death and rebirth. And we think physical death, but really it's the process of something no longer there and how we are reborn outside it. So the thing is that there is no need to fear a Pluto transit, because what it's going to do is bring enlightenment, especially Pluto in Aquarius, which is all about enlightenment, isn't it? So that will bring about your personal enlightenment. Wherever it is in your chart, that's its end. But there's also this feeling that one can almost be excited about a Pluto transit for what it's going to do for us in terms of transforming us at core level. Imagine, in a way, if you were about to embark on a journey up Mount Everest. You've done the training. You're now in the foothills of the Himalayas. Are you excited? Yes, you are. But are you fearful? Yes, you are. And fear is an essential factor because it keeps us on our toes. It keeps us alert. We need the fear factor. But it's in pushing through the fear factor. It's in climbing the mountain and getting to the top of Everest that we feel that exhilaration of having come through the fear barrier, having allowed our passion and what has driven us on this journey, that final moment of triumph. So I think that's a good place to end. As always, thank you so much for your support. I can't tell you how much it means to me. Thank you, and bye-bye.